Content warning. What you are about to hear is a really terrible podcast. This podcast is not suitable for children or those who are easily disturbed. Spoiler warning for Stephen King's It, the It miniseries, and the 2 film adaptations. Trigger warnings for child abuse, death of a child and some other fucked up shit. And now for the obligatory socials. Please like, share and subscribe. Follow Daniel at DStarSick on Twitter. Follow Ryan at Darth Damio on the Bluebird app. You can find the podcast on Twitter at HorrorPod69. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Slasher and Goodreads. Become part of the Disturbed community by asking for the Facebook group and Discord links. Send dick pics to the Horror of Babylon podcast at gmail.com. Support the show at patreon.com/the Horror of Babylon. And finally, you can let your friends know that the Horror of Babylon is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Podcast Addict, TuneIn and the iHeartRadio app. Stay scary.
Welcome to episode 28 of the Horror of Babylon, where we are finally discussing the 1990 It miniseries. I am Ryan, and with me as always is Daniel. Say hi, Daniel.
Hi, Daniel.
I am so excited for this episode.
Me too. Well, we've been looking forward to this one for a while.
Okay, so let's go ahead and jump in. Let's first kick it off with just a little bit of our personal history with this miniseries. Why don't you start?
This was one of those movies that you heard people talk a lot about when I was a kid. Everyone always talked, oh, this is one of the scariest things ever made. But it's like, it's so long, you have to get 2 VHSs. And I was like, 2 VHSs?
No.
There's no way! You know. And sure enough, you know, you go into the rental store and it's like this big, thick thing.
Yeah.
And 2 VHSs looks way longer than it actually is. Like, back in the day, you hear, like, a 3-hour movie.
Oh, my God.
And these days, if a comic book movie isn't 3 hours long, people are like, oh, it's too short.
I mean, this was pre-Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
So.
Films have changed.
Yeah, they really have.
And I loved the cover. I'm like, oh, it has, like, the monster hand on the sewer grate, and people told you it's about a clown that eats children, or eats people, I think is how it was pitched to me. I was like, oh, that sounds super spooky. So I go and I get it, and I watch it, and I was mesmerized by it. And I don't even know if I knew it was based off of a book at the time.
I definitely did it. The first time I saw it was in middle school. I was at a friend's house, and it was like a Sunday afternoon with nothing to do, and we flipped on probably TBS, maybe TNT, and it was on, and it was like partway through. I think we started on the shower scene with Eddie, and that was the first thing I saw, and then we ended up watching it through to the finish, and it just scared the hell out of me. Mm-hmm. And I was, like, immediately engrossed because I love, like, those period pieces, like, of a bunch of kids on summer break in the 50s who are running around getting into trouble, getting their knees scraped up and getting their jeans dirty. But this one also had a killer monster that changed shapes. And
Stranger Things before Stranger Things was a thing.
And I also, like, super hard related to Ben. Mm-hmm. So that's how I saw it. And then I didn't probably see it again until high school when I bought the DVD, and then since I first bought the DVD in high school, it's been something I've watched every couple of years regularly ever since.
When I was trying to get my nephew into horror movies, this is what I picked out for him.
Yeah, I tried to watch this with Emma, my daughter, last year. She made it about 20-ish minutes in. We stopped when the photo album started bleeding, and Bill threw it across the room, which on paper isn't really the scariest scene, but something about that scene that does.
I think that scene's really well directed.
Something that really freaks me out about it is watching his mom like smear the blood around as she's like fondly caressing it, and just how she has all this blood all over her hands and she doesn't realize it. Like,
I just love how seamless the wink is.
Yeah.
I think that's like, again, I really hate jump scares, but if you want to know how to do a jump scare right, that's the scene I would point to.
I like them when they're done well.
Yeah, and that one still kind of gets to me.
Okay, so we're starting to bite into the melon. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about background, a little bit about the production.
The vampire's a pure myth, superstition. I may be able to bring you proof that the superstition of yesterday can become the scientific reality of today.
So this movie was partially written and directed by Tommy Lee Wallace, who also directed Halloween 3, The Fog, Fright Night Part 2, several episodes of the 80s Twilight Zone. He also wrote Halloween 3 and Friday Night Part 2, and he wrote the second Amityville movie.
Okay, so he directed and wrote the most underrated Halloween movie.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the Mist ripoff is what I would call The Fog, even though they're really not that similar.
He studied at the side of John Carpenter. He was like John Carpenter's like right-hand guy on like all of his big movies throughout the 70s and such.
And Fright Night Part 2, while it's not what I would have wanted for a sequel for that movie, it could have been a lot worse. It's fun. It's a fun sequel.
And then the primary scriptwriter was Lawrence D. Cohen, who already had a Stephen King pedigree because he wrote the original screen adaptation of Carrie in 1976, and he wrote the remake of Carrie in 2013, unfortunately.
I was about to compliment him for writing one of the best Stephen King adaptations.
But he also wrote one of the worst. He also wrote The Tommyknockers. And he wrote some of the episodes for Nightmares and Dreamscapes, which was the TV miniseries that adapted a bunch of his short stories. And he wrote the movie version of Peter Straub's Ghost Story.
The bad things people talk about whenever they talk about a Stephen King miniseries, there's not a lot of it in this one. At least I don't think so. Mm-hmm. But all of it is in Tommyknockers, so that makes sense. That
I mean, I had fun watching Tommyknockers, but it's not good. It's not good.
It's a fun night movie. Like, hey, let's stick around to watch the Tommyknockers.
Yeah, let's put something on, have some beers, play some Magic.
It's like watching Dreamcatcher.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Continuing, the original director was supposed to be George A. Romero. When he was a part of the project, there were going to be 4 episodes, and it was going to have a running time of 8 to 10 hours.
I wish we lived in that timeline.
Yeah.
Just so I could see it.
I love what we got, but I have to imagine that would have been amazing, too.
We need to find American Chavez and go to that universe.
So, apparently, ABC kind of got cold feet about doing this book, which... If you think about it, like, this is, the late 80s. It's going to air in the early 90s. ABC is super family-oriented. They're associated with Disney. This is the network that brought you Full House. And this is, like, probably the most sexed-up, violent, awful novel that Stephen King has ever written. So it doesn't make a lot of sense that it would be adapted on ABC. They got cold feet. They, told George, we don't want it to be super violent. We don't want it to be super bloody.
He's probably sitting there then, like, why'd you pick this book?
They cut it from 8 hours down to 4 hours. And the official reason he left the project is because he had a scheduling conflict with the 1990 remake of Night of the Living Dead. But a lot of people suggest that it was probably because he wasn't into the project anymore when they cut the runtime in half. And of course it would eventually go down to 3 hours. Apparently this soured him a little bit on some Stephen King projects, because I didn't know this. He was supposed to be the first person to direct Pet Sematary as well,
which is one of the best Stephen King adaptations.
Yeah, and again, like, Pet Sematary is one of my favorites.
But I still want to see the George A. Romero version.
Yeah, exactly. I want 2 versions of that movie.
And the second version we got wasn't very good.
Yeah. And this is also reminding me of John Carpenter getting fired from Firestarter. Probably more to the detriment there. Like, Pet Sematary and it turned out pretty good. But
Yeah.
And Firestarter was good too. But
It's not as good as this. It's not as good as Pet Sematary.
nowhere near. Okay, so what basically happened with the writing is Lawrence D. Cohen wrote a full screenplay for both episodes 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
And the original concept was actually going to be the same format structure that the new movies are in, where the first episode was entirely the kids with nothing about the adults, and then the second episode would be just the adults. And they actually ended up rejecting that and telling him to do something closer to the novel.
I'm glad they did that.
Yes. And his first draft of episode 1, where it's basically everything up to Stan's suicide, the director, Tommy Lee Wallace, thought it was great, loved it, didn't want to change a thing. However, his script draft for episode 2, the way they put it was, and let me just read the quote. Cohen also initially wrote the second episode as, according to Wallace, a very interior melodrama that delivered heavily from the novel and where Tom Rogan played a much bigger role in the plot. Apparently, he wrote it so that Tom would be the main villain of the second episode. And the director, Tommy Lee Wallace, called him up and said, hey, we can't do this. I'm not going to do this. And they had already started shooting in Vancouver by this point. And he said, please fly from Hollywood up to Vancouver and help me rewrite episode 2. And Lawrence D. Cohen told him no. So their budget was already set, and Tommy Lee Wallace didn't have any money to hire a new writer to rewrite the second episode, so he rewrote it himself.
He did a good job, all things considering.
Obviously, the second half is the weaker half, but all things considered, I think he did a pretty good job.
Yeah.
We'll get into some specific pros and cons and criticisms later, but just some more facts. The budget was $12 million. It aired on ABC in 2 parts on November 18th and 20th in 1990. It was shot in Vancouver. I didn't know this till today. The aired version on TV and the VHS version was 192 minutes. The DVD and Blu-ray version that's out now is 5 minutes shorter at 187 minutes.
What's missing?
I don't know. I never saw it on VHS, so apparently there's 5 minutes of this that I've never seen.
I've seen it on VHS, but I can't. But you know, that was back when, God, I was in grade school, middle school.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I saw it on TV, like I said, but I can't imagine it was probably the same as the DVD version.
Yeah.
I don't know. The soundtrack was done by Richard Bellis. Another fun fact I found out was they didn't do auditions for the adults. The studio picked the actors they wanted, and they just made phone calls and booked them that way. And then they did auditions for the kids based on who the adult actors were. And I didn't realize this until today also, but this is only the second TV adaptation of Stephen King's work after Salem's Lot in 1976.
God, it feels like there should be way more of them, but when you say it out loud.
But this is the one that kind of kicked them all off, because after this we get The Stand, Tommyknockers, the Langoliers, like, because of its success, which is ironic because of the network didn't really have any faith in it, or at least they weren't willing to.
It almost sounds like they were going out of their way to sabotage it halfway through.
Right, and it kind of succeeds despite it. It doesn't have a great reputation these days, but it was definitely a success during the time, and it does have a cult following, like you and I. And then the last thing I wanted to note here is for the casting of Pennywise, they actually considered Malcolm McDowell and Roddy McDowell. Malcolm McDowell, of course, being the John Rainbird from Firestarter. Yeah. Can you imagine him playing Pennywise?
I can. I mean, I don't think they would have done as good of a job as Tom Curry, but...
No. And Roddy McDowall is known for being in like every Planet of the Apes movie, basically. Okay, so that's a lot of background, more than we normally give. Let's go ahead and jump into structure and themes. So first thing I want to talk about is how they adapt the novel over 2 parts.
Mm-hmm.
And to do that, I just kind of want to give like a brief overview of the structure of the 3 different versions, and then I want to get your thoughts. So the novel basically tells the story over 5 parts. First part being Mike making those 6 phone calls, each loser receiving the phone call, and then us kind of getting their story.
Mm-hmm.
Second part being the loser, the framing device is the losers each traveling to Derry and having a flashback and partially remembering their first experience with a Pennywise, and us getting some character building about how they met each other and what their family life was like. Third part is the reunion and the walkabouts. Fourth part is them in the library the night before the final showdown, telling stories and kind of remembering the rest of it. And then the 5th part is both the showdown in the 50s and in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And miniseries does a similar structure, but it's different in one key way, in that it breaks up the 2 showdowns with Pennywise to the end of each of the 2 episodes instead of doing the 2 simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
But unlike the new movies, where it's all kids in the first movie and more or less all adults with a couple flashbacks in the second movie, it still has that frame narrative of the losers getting their phone calls and then traveling to Derry and then having the reunion and then their walkabouts and then all that. So it basically does the same kind of structure, except it moves that showdown with Pennywise that they have when they're kids to the end of the first episode. So what are your kind of thoughts on how they structurally adapt?
I'll forgive the adopt because I keep calling him Tom Curry.
It's Tim, you fool!
Yeah. Yeah, I really, especially after watching this so recently again, I far prefer them to have interject between the kids and the adults, because it really helps get across the point of we forgot all of this nonsense. It's I don't say it's impossible to buy, but I have to compare it to the new movies.
Yeah.
When you break it up and then you have them in the second movie as the adults, we forgot everything. Well, there's no mystery for us now.
Yeah.
Because we just saw what you did.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason you do the memory loss thing is it helps build a mystery. What else haven't they remembered? What else are they going to remember?
I can understand from in a meeting with the studio executives pitching, saying, okay, well, we're just going to make it 2 separate stories. We're going to simplify it, do the kid's story in one movie and the adult's story in another movie. And I can understand that sounding good on paper, but the application, it doesn't really work unless you want to just completely omit this huge theme of losing memories.
And I honestly, and I'm sure we'll bitch about this more when we get to it, but I honestly would have preferred if they would have just cut out the memory loss.
In the new ones, yeah.
In the new ones. Because they had to go back and they had to reshoot things with kids who had obviously just gone through puberty and de-age them on camera. When you do it this way, you already kind of, it's helping you draw people in. And it's not as good as the book, but it's a lot better than everything else we've gotten adaptation-wise.
Okay, so here's a quote from Stephen King that he said during an interview about it. I thought to myself that I'd really like to write a story about what's lost and what's gained when you grow up from childhood to adulthood, and also the things we experience in childhood that are like seeds that blossom later on.
Yeah.
And that really concisely explains one of the big themes in the book, which is the, growing up and how what happens to us affects how we are as adults, and that is kind of just lost on the new adaptations, but this one does it really well.
And I can even relate to it because, music doesn't play or anything, and there's no camera whooshing to my face, But there are some times when someone brings something up, and all of a sudden, a hidden memory's been unlocked. I'm sure everyone's had those feelings. Like, you just made me remember a whole bunch of stuff I managed to repress.
Yeah.
So, I still really would like them to do an adaptation that's even closer to where the showdowns happen at the same time. But I don't know how far out that's going to ever be.
So, I have two thoughts on it. One, I think that it's kind of improvement to separate them, because that was one part of the book that did get a little confusing with them jumping back and forth between the two different showdowns. However, in a visual medium, it shouldn't be confusing.
I even think it would help with... Because you got, like, these themes of mirrors and history repeating itself and breaking cycles.
Yeah. And
seeing that stuff side by side, it's like when movies these days have a flashback sequence to something we just saw 5 minutes ago. Mm-hmm. How is this? Would be even better, because it's revealing stuff as they're unlocking their memories, at least to me.
I'm sure there will be a third adaptation of it, hopefully before we're dead.
Sometime we should cover the Fujiwara, what he was going to do with it.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Maybe we'll mention that at the end of our It versus Phantoms episode to give that episode a little more girth.
Yeah.
Okay, so and we've already kind of started talking about themes, but what themes would you say from the book adapted into the miniseries, and then what themes do they kind of miss on or don't include?
I'm hard-pressed to think of one they don't include. I'm sure you'll have a better answer for that. A lot of them were diluted. Budding sexuality was definitely... There's still hints of it there.
Yeah.
But it's very watered down. That's probably the biggest one. At least that
was going to be the one that I was going to bring up.
The ones that I think they do the best is growing up, how it changes you, how sometimes it doesn't change you, like with the case of Eddie.
Yeah.
He's my go-to example for the person who doesn't change.
Well, and also Beverly, they don't spend a lot of time on Tom Rogan, but they do actually establish him first, and then you get to find out about her relationship with her father, and then you see, she's continuing the cycle of abusive relationships.
Yeah. And she even talks about that at one point in this. I can't remember if she had a similar speech in the book.
It's bad. Like, I just finished reading the book a couple weeks ago, but I'm already starting to blur all of these.
They start to blur, especially when you're doing them all back to back.
Yeah.
And we've read the book so many times, you've seen the miniseries so many times, it's hard to keep straight.
Yeah. So some other themes that come across really well, the bullying theme.
Bullying theme is so good in this one.
Yeah, it's huge. They do a really good job. Henry Bowers is, oh my God.
I love the greaser look.
Yeah. Still, I'm curious what he would have looked like in a pink leather jacket.
If anyone's ever stupid enough to go, Daniel, here is $40 million, make us a Stephen King it. The first thing I'm doing is casting Henry Bowers based off of who looks the most bullying in a pink leather jacket.
If you haven't read the book and you're just tuning in for this episode, in the book he has a pink leather jacket and he beats people up who give him shit about it.
And I will heavily insinuate that he is a closeted homosexual.
Yeah, there's definitely evidence to support that in the novel.
That would be what Daniel leans into. That's how his adaptation will be different.
So a theme that they don't really touch much in this is the loss of a sibling and how it kind of harms Bill's relationship with his parents.
Not even the faintest hint of a whisper of it. There's like one scene maybe.
Yeah, and honestly, that's something that the new movies probably do a little better, but it's just one of those things where you literally can't include everything. And
I'll give It Chapter 1 that. It does what parents are like after one of their children die.
Yeah, the scene with Bill and his dad in the garage in Chapter 1 just kind of lays that out really well. Mm-hmm. But otherwise, like, most of the themes that are in the book are there. Meta horror is obviously represented really well in this. The death of a child is, yeah.
Exploration of homophobia is missing.
Yeah, well, any of the sex-related themes are more or less gone.
Which I will give props to the new movies for including that.
for the theme of like belief and faith, I think they go even harder on in the miniseries than they do in the book. Like, it's much more explicit.
I think they spell it out because a lot of that comes from like internal dialogue in the book.
Yeah.
And characters' thoughts. In this, the
Bill,
audience can't see what they're thinking.
So Bill explicitly says, if we believe the Silver Slugs will kill him, then they will.
I think the movie probably would have benefited from a scene where that's shown somehow.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how I would have done that. And then he reemphasizes it later.
Yeah.
That's me being a minor nitpicky, though.
Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into characters, which is generally the longest section. We're going to actually start with Pennywise, the dancing clown, as portrayed by Tim Curry.
Can't keep calling him Tom.
I'm going to read this little blurb from the oral history of it that I read, and then I just want to kind of get your thoughts on Pennywise and Tim Curry. Basic inspiration was Lon Chaney's Phantom of the Opera, stylized into a clown. We ended up doing 3 versions. One that was a little heavier, almost a hobo clown. One that was a little meaner, and the one you saw in the show. Originally, we intended to have a prosthetic chin and cheekbones, but Tim wanted to wear as little prosthetics as possible. We did use a special kind of prosthetic makeup cream for the clown makeup, one that doesn't rub off. I wanted Pennywise to be very stylized, almost like a living cartoon.
I think that's a very accurate descriptor of what we ended up with. I can't remember where I heard this from. It must have been on one of those YouTube Did You Know videos where they purposely tried to make him look a little alien.
Mm-hmm. With like the bulbous head.
Yeah.
So I read Yahoo did years ago for the 25th anniversary. They did an oral history of it. They interviewed like the director, the writer, Stephen King, a huge chunk of the cast, all the special effects people, and it's like really long. And one of the things they talked about is how originally they were going to use all these prosthetics to make him look more freaky, but Tim Curry just thought all that would get in the way. But the one prosthetic they did convince him to wear was like a fake forehead, so he kind of had like dome head.
The dome head.
Yeah.
I think that was the right call, honestly. A lot of prosthetics can get in the way of acting, and you and I are both very pro makeup, practical effects. In this case, he's a clown. He's a clown that's supposed to look a little off, a little out of place, so making him look like a living cartoon. I think that was the right call between the 3 choices that we were just read off.
And the intent was they wanted him to, at first, look like something that a child wouldn't run away from. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, then he would do something scary and scare them. And I think that's what we got. If you didn't know anything about the story and you just saw him at a glance not doing anything scary, you think, oh, okay, he's a clown. But then, of course, it flips on a dime and he becomes terrifying.
And then he gets the teeth.
A really funny criticism I heard in a different podcast about the new movies is they're like, the whole point of Pennywise being a clown is he's supposed to use it to lure children in, but Bill Skarsgård's Pennywise is so fucking scary right from the start, no kid would ever do that.
I think that's a good criticism of if you're just familiar with the movies. Mm-hmm. In the book, he goes from like 0 to 100 all the time.
He does.
He shows up just as a scary leper, as a giant bird. He doesn't fool around with the clown too much.
He often will start as a monster and then go to the clown.
Yeah.
And then like use the clown to like tease them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The clown's the bully.
So what do you think of Tim Curry's performance?
Fantastic. Anyone who does Pennywise is of course going to be compared to him, at least to me.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people these days are going to compare Pennywise to Skarsgård, and I think Skarsgård did a good job.
Yeah.
I still prefer Tim Curry.
Same, and I like what Skarsgård did, and I'm glad he didn't just try to replicate Tim Curry.
I'm very happy for that.
Yeah, I'd rather have like a worse movie with a different performance than maybe a better movie with him just trying to do the same thing.
1,000 Heath Ledger Jokers.
Yeah, exactly. But even if Bill Skarsgård did something better, it's never going to be like a part of the horror pop culture, mind the way that Tim Curry's is, because, I mean, he just scared an entire generation of kids.
Yeah.
Also, just a quick shout out to Stephen Weber, who does the audiobook. His Pennywise is also...
His Pennywise is pretty decent.
Yeah.
If they ever do an animated series, use him.
Skarsgård's costume is more book accurate.
With the silver and stuff.
Yeah, what are your thoughts there?
That's one of the things... I'm sure Stephen King had a reason for the choices he made with how the clown looked.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of those things where I would just shrug my shoulders and go, this is one of the things you can change, I don't care.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, it's a clown outfit.
He looks more like Bozo in this, I guess, than, I don't know. Okay, so that's great, and we'll talk more about Pennywise as we go along. So we're going to jump into Georgie Dembro next, played by Tony Dakota. That iconic opening scene with the sewer. What are your thoughts?
Do they float? Yes, Georgie. They float. They all float. I love that. I love that scene so much.
So they do a lot of like the cutaway and implied violence because of it being on TV and whatnot. Do you like that we never like see him actually dig into Georgie? We just kind of see him pull Georgie in. We see his teeth, and it like cuts away and implies that something terrible happened.
I think it's the best you possibly could have done given the limitations. I think in a perfect world we'd have some mix between what we got here and what we get in the new one.
Yeah.
Mostly just because I think the new Pennywise, when he bites Georgie's arm off, is big goofy CGI face. In this, you get to see prosthetic teeth.
Yeah.
It's very real looking. This definitely freaked me out as a kid.
Oh yeah, it scared the hell out of me.
And if I'm given the choice between goofy CGI and a cutaway, this is what I choose every time.
Yeah, no, same. I think that I'm a big fan of movie violence when it's used for a reason. Mm-hmm. I'm also a big fan of less is more and implying and doing things off camera and leaving it up to people's imagination. Same opinion as you. I'd rather have what we got here than just some CG fest, but I would like to see a more violent version of this with more practical effects. And of course, then you just have to have a really good director who knows how to balance all this stuff, which is hard.
Not us. So.
No, not me. Not me.
But that is our preference.
Yeah.
Marry these two scenes, and you'll probably get the best Georgie death.
I think give us like 10, 15 years, maybe a little more. Then give us like a straight to a streaming service miniseries.
8 episodes.
Yeah, like
originally intended.
Like 8-hour-long episodes, or maybe 8 2-hour. Maybe not that long, but something much longer. Have it be a real adaptation of the novel. You can cut out some of the gross sex parts if you need to.
If you need to.
Yeah. But, I don't know. Okay. Bill Dembrow, as child Bill Dembrow, played by Jonathan Brandis, and adult played by Richard Thomas. What do you think of Bill?
My opinion, I'm just going to share my opinion for all the kids. I think all the kids did better than their adult counterparts.
I am not as critical as the adult cast as a lot of people are in reviewing this movie. However, definitely the children did a better job on the whole.
This is still how even though he doesn't look like the book description per se, this is still what I picture when I read the book.
And still, same for me. Like when I'm reading the book, I picture the kids from this miniseries. I still see Seth Green. I don't see Wolf Finhard guy.
My biggest difference is I see Seth Green as a child and as an adult.
Yeah.
Is how I picture it now.
A lot of the kids give really good performances. I think one of the best performances is by Jonathan Brandis as Bill Dembrow. That scene in the Barrens, or "You killed my brother, you bastard." what does he say? Like, where are you now? Or what have you now? Like, I really love that.
Is this the best you can do?
And then
Pennywise shows up with a million little Pennywises.
Richard Thomas's adult Bill is fine.
Yeah.
He's not. You're right. He's not anything like the book describes. Like, he's supposed to be bald and fat.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess that's just a Hollywood thing. They're like, well, you could have a bald and a fat guy, or you could have not a bald and a fat guy. And they're like, okay, well, let's do the second.
Instead, we're gonna give him like a. It's not quite a hipster ponytail, but
It's pretty close.
He goes from. This is how I would describe him. In the book, he is almost a counterculture writer.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, I'm gonna write pulp, and I'm gonna love it.
Yeah.
And
fuck all those literature professors who say otherwise.
And this guy looks like a literature professor.
Yeah.
He looks like the dude who would be going, now what did Shakespeare mean when he had the three witches brewing?
The vibe he gives me is like a Hollywood producer with that ponytail. That's how I feel.
Okay.
But
he also kind of looks like a lot of dudes that I've seen run porn shops. Just standing behind the counter going, hey, don't take your dick out in the back.
Or he works at a gas station that has like a back room with like beads over it that if you're over 18, you can go to the back room and see what's back there.
I'm being so mean to this dude. I will, if you ever by some chance watch this, I will post pictures and you can roast me back.
No, I don't think he looks bad. It's just, it's not my vision of Bill.
Not my Bill.
Yeah. But granted, I mean, they don't do that in the new movies either. I mean,
they go even further.
Yeah. But I mean, and honestly, it's not super important that he's bald and fat. As far as like the character himself, I think writing wise, he's pretty on point.
I would just really like to see a dude who looks more how I picture a writer looking. And I guess he looks like a writer. He just doesn't look like the type of writer.
Yeah.
That the book describes.
He does have those giant Stephen King glasses.
Do you think that was on purpose? They're like,
maybe
Stephen King wears these really thick glasses. You need to put these on.
Because his eyes are so bad from being hunched over the typewriter. Just like the most awkward part about it for me is the scene in the Chinese restaurant where he just walks in and just gives Bev that super awkward kiss.
Now, does he kiss her or does she kiss him?
He kisses her.
Okay.
And it's probably the second most awkward kiss for me in movie history after Luke and Leia kissing in Empire Strikes Back.
I have some thoughts on Bev, but I'll wait till we get to her.
Okay, so we'll table that for now. Audra Dembrow, played by Olivia Hussey. What are your thoughts on that?
She's fine.
I like, and I've been thinking about this more ever since we recorded the last episode. Mm-hmm. I think I like how they adapted to her getting into the sewers.
Way better.
Yeah. Because you said that in the last episode, and I've been thinking it makes a lot of sense rather than all of the convolutedness with Tom of just Pennywise grabbing her and just bringing her down.
Pennywise can do it. Well, how's she able to see Pennywise? She's not a kid. Well, she pretends all the time. She's an actress.
Yeah.
There's a million reasons you can come up with.
And he can appear to adults.
Yeah, he just chooses not to most of the time.
He prefers kids. Like, I mean, he killed Adrian Mellon. Like, he appears to him and takes a bite out of his neck.
He just likes fucking with people.
Yeah.
Especially kids.
Kids are easier to scare because, as he says in the book, their fears are usually one thing that's more concrete, where adults are usually afraid of ideas and abstract things.
When he wants to eat an adult, he has to appear as a overdraft bill.
Yeah, he appears as a mortgage with a final due notice on it. Yeah. Or he appears as the rise of nationalism in American politics.
And the flag wraps itself around you and he eats you like that, like a slug. Okay, that sounds kind of scary.
Yeah.
Stephen King, don't steal this idea. This is mine. The man-eating flag.
But yeah, I think she's very serviceable. I do really like the epilogue scene on Silver at the end. I love that scene in the book, and I think it's a good way to close the miniseries, and I think she does a good job in it.
I like the closing overall.
Yeah. With Mike's narration. I love Mike's narration.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'll talk about that more when we get to Mike. Okay, so Ben Hanscom, who is played by Brandon Crane as a kid, and John Ritter as an adult. John Ritter, not like a lot of like huge actors in this, aside from Seth Green, who was not huge at the time. But at the time, John Ritter was probably like the biggest name in this because he had been on a lot of television shows, and he'd been in the Problem Child movies. Just thoughts on Ben in general.
One of my, not that he's fat by any means, but when he's an adult and everyone's like, "Where'd the rest of you go?" I'm like, it's not like he's super thin.
No, but I mean, he's definitely, like you said, he's not fat.
That was my first thought.
But I prefer that to what we got in the new miniseries,
right,
where he's like a fucking dreamboat.
Yeah, that's too much. I think he did a good job. I preferred his lonerness in the book.
Yes.
That sort of orbiter status. But they cut out a lot of those sorts of themes in this, or they watered them down. They really distilled them.
Or they just didn't have as much time to establish them.
Yeah.
So in the book, when you meet Ben as an adult,
He's playing with his coins in the bar.
yeah, the bartender makes a point of saying he always comes in by himself. He's never with a woman. It's implied that he still remembers Beverly on some level, and he's still like loyal to her, even though he doesn't really remember her. But in this, when we meet him, he's literally getting drunk with some hottie.
And he's like, "I ever tell you I used to be fat? Oh, there's no way. Yeah, real butterball. You want me to tell you about my boy tits some more, lady?"
I mean, if it works. However,
I couldn't see my penis until I was 16.
At the end of it, when they kind of have their like little confession scene outside the hospital,
Mm-hmm.
he does say that line where, you know, she's crying about how she married this terrible person. He's like, well, at least you did fall in love with somebody, which kind of implies that he's never been in love with anyone else.
It's just been physical.
Yeah, so, I mean, which is kind of the same thing where he is with women, but he's not really with them. It's just all physical.
I'm kind of a cheeseball, and I love, like, stupid ass one-liners and romantic scenes. So when he's sitting there talking to Bev and goes, "Well, if you can see now, then you're not blind anymore." And that's a miracle. I was like, that is so cheesy, but I love it.
I know.
I love it so much.
I love that scene too. But I if somebody told me they hated it, I don't think I could really argue with them.
It's very melodramatic, but in a strange way, it almost strikes me as something that I know's not in the book, but feels like it should have been.
Okay, I'm going to table this for now because I have a piece on that. I'm going to table this for now. Okay. They kind of randomly make him a new kid to Derry. He lives with his mom, and they live with her sister because his dad died in the war, which was in the book. But in the book, she works to support them, and they have their own place, and they kind of made it so now they have to live with her sister, which they kind of use that to establish he has a bad home life which I guess is easier and shorter to do than in the book, where it's, well, she gives him food to make herself feel better about not being able to give him a better life.
I felt like I would have been more okay with this if they would have shown his reaction to living with these people was to go and eat some candy or something.
Yeah.
But instead he just kind of runs off and plays. I'm like, well, he's going out and exercising.
I guess they were like, okay, you have 2 minutes of screen time to establish Ben's home life. And I'm like, well, I don't know.
I still would have changed it to his home life is his... I don't know, maybe his mom's not around, so she leaves a bunch of junk food.
Yeah.
Something like that. I know that being fat isn't his only characteristic, but it's a big part of him still in the book.
That, and he's a loner.
Yeah.
Which they do establish that pretty well.
Yeah.
Another thing they change is his first encounter with Pennywise. Instead of seeing the mummy, he sees his like a ghost of his dad. Which I'm not really sure. What are your thoughts?
It's okay. It's okay.
It's probably my least favorite Pennywise encounter, and
it's my least favorite in this miniseries. It almost seems a little too existential.
Yeah.
It almost seems like something the mother would have seen before the kid.
In the mummy scene in the book, it isn't my favorite, but I do love like the imagery of a real mummy emerging from under a bridge on a frozen river, and they make a point of saying it's a real mummy, it's not a movie mummy.
And the balloons are like going against the wind.
Yeah, which I guess that would have been hard to do, but I don't know.
With the budget and the constraints you have at the time, it's fine. That's my opinion of it. It's not bad. There's a spooky skeleton, which probably scared me as a child.
Yeah. I think the real strength of Ben in this adaptation is his crush on Beverly, writing the poem, dropping it off
and that's what they really play that up for him.
Yeah.
As part of his journey. I also think John Ritter was that who played the adult? I think he's probably the best adult actor.
Yeah, and
not surprising
because he's
if you don't include Tim Curry.
Yeah. He's the one who has like somewhat of a movie resume and has like the better pedigree. A lot of these people are mostly TV actors, and
he gets the cheesy one-liner I love.
Again, I don't think they're bad. I'm less critical of the adult cast than a lot of people are. And a lot of reviews of this miniseries, they just roast all of the adult actors.
I don't know if I'd roast them. I'd say I think at worst they're serviceable.
Yeah.
And at best is John Ritter.
And I will acknowledge that I am nostalgic for this.
Same. So
I am biased.
I am also even though we're not to it yet, I'm still comparing it to the new movie.
And I can definitely acknowledge that my opinion on this would probably be different if I saw it as an adult for the first time instead of growing up with it.
And that's part of the thing is skipping ahead a little bit. I don't think that this is still scary to me, but I still think it would scare a kid.
I've seen it too many times for it to be scary.
Yeah, I think I've seen it too many times to be objective about it.
Yeah, same. Okay, so let's jump into Beverly. Young Beverly, played by Emily Perkins. Adult Emily was played by Annette O'Toole. What do you think of Beverly Marsh? Beverly Marsh.
So it should be obvious they cut out a bunch of the sex stuff and a lot of the innuendos. But there's still like this weird sort of hint around adult Bev. She's like stroking some of their hands as they have their hands on her. Bill kisses her and she kisses him back.
Oh yeah,
and
she?
And she's talking about how she fell in love with all. What this really sort of reminded me of, and maybe this is just speaking to this day and age, and I'm projecting like modern sensibilities onto this. When I'm sitting there watching her, I'm like, this is just a polyamorous relationship with 6 dudes, is how adult Bev is acting around all of them.
Yeah, I get a little bit of that. I think it comes off better when they're kids.
Yeah, when they're kids, it doesn't seem like that. It just seems like friends.
I really just think that super sexy tongue kiss with Bill was a mistake.
But let me see your hand for a second. I have never gone to any of my friends and done this as they have their hand over my shoulders.
No, like I noticed that too on this watch through, that they're all super touchy with Bev.
It struck me as this is a polyamorous relationship, and she is like, what do you call the center of a wheel? The spoke? Spoke? Yeah, she's the spoke of the wheel.
She's the matriarch.
Yeah, she's the matriarch. This is a reverse harem.
Yeah.
I don't even know if that's really a criticism, because I felt like they were trying to hint to some of the stuff that they couldn't talk about.
Do you remember
the
second Futurama movie, Beast with a Billion Backs?
Yeah.
Where Fry gets into the polyamorous relationship.
With the entire universe.
Well, first with the girl.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then with the entire universe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that Emily Perkins, the little girl, she does a really good job doing the more positive aspects of Bev's character, like the slingshot. I love every second where she has like a slingshot in her hand. She does a good job with the love triangle between her and Ben and Bill. There's that scene where they're walking back from the Barrens. It's Bill, Ben, and Bev. And Bill says bye and he kind of leaves, and then she's like staring off at him as he's
longingly
leaving. Yeah, and she gives like a real adult look.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really impressed by that. But what even impressed me more about that is how, like, Ben just kind of lonely, pathetically wanders off as she's still staring out after Bill.
Ryan, is it safe to say that you and I have both been in that situation?
Oh, I've been,
So
been
many
in that
times.
situation more than once.
Oh, way more than once.
Yeah, no.
Going, oh, okay.
Where she's like, bye, Bill. And Ben leaves, and he goes, bye, Beverly. And she's, bye, Ben. It's like, oh.
That scene rings a little true to life.
Yeah. Maybe a little too true, but, I mean, it's good.
No, I like my life now.
And that they do a good job of establishing that, you know, she's a poor girl. That scene where her and Ben are talking outside of the school.
Some people's dads are janitors.
I know, like, oh my god, I just want to jump through the screen and strangle that little girl.
Which, I'm sure that there's someone out there that goes, oh, who just says that out loud? And I can promise you people do just say that shit out loud to get under your skin.
Yeah, I've heard some pretty mean shit.
People who make criticism like that just reveal that they've never actually been bullied.
Yeah, and I believe it. Like, obviously, those are, like, rich girls, and they're... In the book, they make a point, or King makes a point of saying that they feel threatened by her because, you know, they have everything better than she does, except they can never have the natural beauty and charisma.
Yeah, she's pretty in a way that they can never be.
Yeah, their daddies can't buy them that. So that's why they hate her. That's why they lash out at her.
And I don't know. I really like Bev in this.
What about her and her dad?
It's very good for the watered down version that it is.
Yeah, I remember, like, it made me very uncomfortable when I was a kid, before, or even as an adult, before I read the book.
Yeah.
But it's hard to compare it to what's in the book, or even what's in the new movies,
or even what's in other movies. I've seen so many more like parent-child abusive portrayals at this point.
Yeah.
But when you're sitting there going, well, it was ABC constraints on a Stephen King novel about childhood abuse.
Yeah.
Not just about that, but...
No.
It's about a lot of things. It's 1,500 pages long.
Okay, and then just quickly, Al Marsh was played by Frank C. Turner. I still hear him saying in my head very clearly, I worry about you, Bevy.
I worry a lot.
Like...
I really liked him as the hag.
Yeah. That was good. I really enjoyed that. Okay, so let's jump into Eddie, who is played by Adam Farrazel. I'm sorry if you've listened to this ever. Adam.
Eddie Spaghetti!
And Dennis Christopher as an adult.
Don't call me Spaghetti. I hate it.
I think that the kid version of Eddie is probably one of the best adaptations of the kids as from the book. Because you see, like, a real arc with him that you don't get with all of the kids. Where you just see him gain that confidence after learning from Mr. Keen about his inhaler, and then him standing up to Pennywise and saying, it's battery acid, you slime. And then, just like in the book, he loses all that somehow between there and becoming an adult. And then kind of has to have that moment where he stands up to Pennywise again as an adult, but it ultimately leads to his death.
I have a confession. I've never had sex with anyone.
I don't really know what the motivation for adding that was. Was it just specifically so they said they did not have sex in the sewer? Because Eddie's a virgin, it never happened.
And then Richie's like, I can't really help you with that, pal.
I mean, you could, Richie. You could take him over there.
I've only been in love with you guys. I'm like, he's dropping some strong hints there, guys.
Yeah.
Come on, just give him a reach around.
Yeah, I never thought twice about that as a kid, but now it's just like, why did they choose to put that in there?
It is definitely the weirdest part in this miniseries.
Did they just want to make him more pathetic? Because they do. He's not married.
Mm-hmm.
His mom is still alive. He still lives with his mother. He's a virgin. I guess they just thought he needed to be more pathetic, as if adult Eddie isn't pathetic enough in the book.
They're like, he already owns limos. That's too much.
Yeah.
If you own limos, you can't get your dick wet.
I'm sure he showers every day.
No, he's too scared of showers because that's where he saw the Pennywise.
Maybe he takes sponge baths.
Yeah, he just avoids the crotch. Mommy said that's the no-no zone.
Obviously, they were never going to do the leper in this adaptation. I really like the shower scene, specifically because of the practical effects they do with the claymation with Pennywise coming out of the drain.
I think that's very... Again, it's not something that's in the book, but it feels like something that could have been in the book.
Right, and it's just like, a kid who's afraid of taking a shower after gym class. We were never made to do that as kids when I was in school, but I definitely would not have been okay with it.
Yeah, and it also kind of plays on to... It's not too much in this adaptation. There's a little bit of it, how Pennywise can really just alter reality.
Yeah.
He's like a living cartoon character. Of course he can spread open the whole, like it's a Bugs Bunny cartoon.
And that's still that effect just still looks good to this day.
It still looks creepy.
Yeah, whereas, all the CG in the new movies in 10 years, or not even 10 years, but is going to look bad at some point.
Yeah.
But that practical effect still looks awesome to this day, and always will.
There's a lot of scenes like that I really like. The first confrontation in the sewer when he goes down the drain and then they all grab his hand and then it's this giant monster hand.
Yeah,
I love that scene.
That's great. I love it. Any more thoughts on Eddie?
Not really, not off the top of my head.
I hate when you stutter my name, Bill.
I got to make all the jokes about him I wanted.
Okay, speaking of jokes, Richie Tozier, played by Seth Green as a kid and Harry Anderson, they change him to being a comedian instead of being a radio DJ, which I have some thoughts on that. What do you think, though?
I think that it's set a weird trend because he's also a stand-up comic in It Chapter 2.
I think it's kind of a generational thing. So, Stephen King is old.
Stephen King, radio show hosts aren't as big as they used to be.
No.
Nowadays you might have like a podcaster, like a Seth Rogen type.
Yeah.
Maybe not for Richie, but you know what I mean.
But Stephen King's generation, right? They sat around the radio as families and listened to it.
You know what I would have made him if I wanted to do an updated version of Richie? A voice actor.
Yeah. I can see that.
He's Seth MacFarlane. That's who he is. He does a bunch of stupid-ass voices, makes jokes that no one finds funny, and now he has $1 million.
Yeah. I could definitely see that. I think for the 90s...
the 90s this worked.
Stand-up comedy was pretty big in the 80s and then the 90s.
I honestly don't think it's that big a thing, even like when It Chapter 2 came out.
No, I haven't watched stand-up comedy in a long time.
I think that actually dates it worse than they thought it might. But that's an opinion. I'm bringing too much It Chapter 2 into this.
Yeah, and maybe I'm being hard on maybe a lot of people watch a lot of stand-up and I
just think that there's a few really good stand-up comics, but that's it. And there are people who established themselves in the 80s and 90s and just were able to keep carrying their careers forward with it.
Yeah, and a lot of stand-up comics do that to start and then go on to TV and movies, and
which is kind of what Richie does at the end of this.
Yeah, very true.
He gets to be in a movie with somebody who's basically just Eddie.
As a kid, I never knew who they were referring to. I think they're referring to Woody Allen.
No, I hope it's Woody Allen. Can we say it's Woody Allen?
I mean,
Headcanon.
I think that's who they're referring to, but I don't know.
Richie's up there with him going, so you married your daughter, huh? That's messed up.
Are you a Seth Green fan?
I'm a big Seth Green fan. When they didn't cast Seth Green as the adult for Richie in It Chapter 2 is when I knew the movie would be bad.
I'm not a Family Guy fan anymore, but I had been watching it. I watched it on its premiere date, and I watched it up until college age. And even now, I wouldn't mind watching a few clips of Chris. Chris is pretty funny.
Even take something as dumb as Robot Chicken. That's something Richie would do in the modern age.
I mean, Robot Chicken is great.
Yeah.
It gets a little repetitive, but I like it. I Loved the Austin Powers movies as a kid. Even Rat Race was one of my favorite comedies when I was a kid. And
Oh my! You unlocked a hidden memory.
I mean, Seth Green was a big part of my childhood, and
Same.
yeah. So like, and not excluding it. Obviously, he was never going to do his N-word Jim voice on cable TV in 1990.
He was never going to do his bad Mexican accent.
No, but he does do some voices, and they are bad. So I think it works, and they do a good job of establishing that he doesn't have good impulse control, like when he dumps the soda on Henry Bowers, and when he pushes his lunch tray into Henry in the cafeteria. So I think they do a good job of that.
Maybe I'm biased, but I also thought Seth Green was one of the better children actors.
No, I agree, but I mean, obviously, like, he's by far the most successful of all of these people, so...
Yeah.
And even including all the adults, he's the one who's still out there working and doing things. Not that other people in this movie aren't, but, I mean, he's the one that you hear
He's probably the biggest name that's still around.
What do you think of Harry Anderson as adult Richie?
I was too biased for wishing it was Seth Green. But I'm like, what time machine can I get to make that work? Again, a lot of like my book and my movie is blurring together, but I felt like they made him a lot more of a coward in this.
They did.
Okay, so that wasn't something I was imagining, right?
None of that is in the book. Like, there's no hesitation from any of them.
And because he kept trying to run away in this, I was like, I don't remember that in the book at all.
No, because it's not.
Okay, so that's...
I think it makes sense that if you're, like, adapting this, that there should be a voice saying, hey, guys, we don't have to do this.
Maybe this isn't a great idea.
Yeah.
Or maybe we should bring a gun.
But they do make that, like, his whole character, as an adult, like, his character is his jokes and his voices, or, hey, guys, let's get the fuck out of here.
I really like the scene where he sees them, he goes away, washes his face, because he still needs to put on a show.
Yeah.
I thought that was actually a pretty good scene.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I've done that when I've had to go to some sort of social gathering. I've gone, like, to the door and then been like, no, I need 2 more minutes, and then so I completely understand there. What do you think of no Paul Bunyan?
Oh, I forgot about Paul Bunyan. It was never going to happen in this.
It would have, and if they did do it, it probably would have been a super tall guy, and it would have looked not great.
It either would have been like it probably would have been like, like a big KFC statue.
That's
instead of like a giant, like a real giant statue.
That's one of the few times where I'm like, yeah, that probably would have been hard to do with practical effects. Maybe it'd be better in CG.
I just cut it.
Yeah.
Or claymation. They might have tried to like superimpose.
Which is what they did. They didn't use it. They just kind of simplified the whole werewolf thing and just made it the werewolf Richie scare. I remember, like, even as a kid, I always kind of thought the werewolf looked bad, but then when I was watching it this time, I kind of realized that it's supposed to look like a movie werewolf. It actually looks like the Wolfman, like the original Wolfman, or kind of looks like, but he has the Letterman jacket, like teenage werewolf. So even though it doesn't look great, I think that was kind of the intention, that because he was scared by a movie werewolf, so he's being attacked by a movie
It just doesn't
werewolf.
look like the realest werewolf that could have ever possibly existed.
No. Of course, then, that aspect of the book isn't really used in this.
Yeah.
I mean, the same with the mummy. We'll get to the mummy.
Yeah.
He doesn't look real at all, either.
I love the pom-poms on the mummy.
Yeah, those are great. Okay, so let's keep going. Mike Hanlon, Marlon Taylor as a kid, Tim Reed as an adult. So I'm actually going to give just a wee bit of pushback. John Ritter, I think Tim Reed competes with John Ritter as the best of the adult actors. I love his narration. I just love that noir opening with him in the rain in the trench coat, and he finds, he's bribing the cop to get information.
All he was missing was his fedora.
Yeah, no, it's super noir.
I agree. He has a really soothing voice.
He does.
He should do audiobooks.
No, he really should.
I really like actually getting to see that scene.
There's a little Easter egg when Henry and the gang jump Mike. Henry says something like, "This kid and his family have been giving my family trouble for years."
Mm-hmm.
So even though you don't get to go into the backstory of everything between the Hanlons and the Bowers,
You get like a little hint of it.
yeah, which is something that people who read the book will appreciate. Another thing that was actually an addition for the miniseries that I really like was the photo that Mike takes of all 7 of them after the rock fight.
Mm-hmm.
Something that's completely added, isn't in the book at all, but I think is kind of an iconic piece of this miniseries, and it's, I don't know, I just thought it was a nice touch.
No, I like it.
Yeah.
His closing narration, probably one of the best parts of the movie.
No, I completely agree.
What about the kid? What do you think of him?
It's hard to judge him because he's
so little.
Yeah, he gets so shortchanged.
I think it's real funny. He gets really shortchanged in this.
Mm-hmm.
And then the attempts to correct the shortchangedness in the other adaptation somehow make it worse for me.
I honestly think that the kid who plays Mike Hanlon in the new movies gets shortchanged too.
Yeah. I mean, he does get shortchanged, but a lot of what they did in that movie was, we need to include him more.
Yeah.
And in that process of inventing stuff for him, they took away the things that made him special in the book instead of playing it up.
I think that of all the character adaptations and my least favorite one is probably adult Mike Hanlon in It Chapter 2.
That's so bad.
Yeah.
This Mike I really like.
Yeah, I love the adult Mike Hanlon. Kid Mike Hanlon is fine, but it's not, like, he just didn't have a lot. He had the rock fight, and then he's in the sewer scenes, but he doesn't really do anything.
I think what they really needed was the nurse scene added back in.
Yeah.
And even you could have had it be like a form of Pennywise sneaking in and he does something.
Yeah. No bird.
No bird.
Granted, a giant bird probably would have been hard to do.
He needed a scare as a kid, and he needed a final stand as an adult.
Yeah.
Wouldn't have taken a lot, but again, I wasn't there. I didn't have the budgetary constraints or the episode constraints that this had. He probably did have a bigger role in the 8-episode plan.
Yeah, I'm sure. Something I appreciated as I was reading the oral history was most of the actors said, well, I hadn't read the book, so blah, 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 blah. But Tim Reed, who played adult Mike Hanlon, said that he hadn't read the book, but when he was offered, he made a point of reading the book before he started filming.
I think it's probably why he comes off so good.
Yeah. He really understood the character, that he was the lighthouse keeper,
mm-hmm.
and how important that was. Okay, so to our last loser, Stan Uris, Ben Hiller as a kid, Richard Mauser as an adult. What are your general thoughts on Stan?
My general thoughts is Stan also doesn't get a lot of moments.
He and Mike are similar in that.
They're the characters that get kind of shortchanged so that they can build. And I can kind of see the point when you only have so many episodes and so much time.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, well, this guy dies right at the beginning of the book. Why would I spend any time with him as a kid?
They redo the structure of it a little bit so that instead of his suicide being right at the beginning,
like one of the first things that happen.
Yeah, it's at the end of the first episode.
Yeah, it's the bookend,
which is a great way to close the episode.
It's one of the most iconic parts of this is the like, Stan suicide with it written across there.
It's like that and the sewer scene are probably the sewer grade, the Georgie.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are probably the two biggest ones. And granted, Stan does have the least amount of character building in the book as well.
And the character building he has is very abstract of the wrongness of the situation, mm-hmm. which is something super hard to get across without a shit ton of exposition.
But I think with him as a kid, they do a good job with getting across the fact that he's not like the other 6.
Yeah, he ain't happy to be there.
Yeah, but he still goes along with everything because he's still a part of the group. I do think they play him to be a little bit more of a coward than he is, because he doesn't kill himself because he's scared. He kills himself because
he can't accept that this is the world.
That, and he knows that
it is going to get worse.
Yeah, because it is pregnant, which they don't do any of that, and which is
that still needs to happen.
Yeah, I don't know. I think Stan Uris is a very hard character to adapt. Okay, actually, adult Stan Uris in the new movies might be worse than adult Mike. They're both so bad.
Yeah.
I have a specific reason for that, but I'll save it till
we'll save it for that. Okay.
Yeah. And then adult Stan, we only get the one scene, but again, that's like maybe one of the best scenes, one of the two best scenes.
And it's honestly shot really well.
The part that freaked me out on this viewing was how he's so intent and direct, like, I'm going to take a bath. Immediately walks up the stairs, walks in, shuts the door, starts undoing his tie, starts undoing his suspenders. There's like no hesitation. And like,
and that's how I picture it happening in the book too. It's just, well, guess I'll die.
And then just mentioning Patty Uris, played by Caitlin Hicks, I thought she did a great job. The scene where she walks in and she just kind of slowly realizes what happens and then drops the glass she was going to give him his beer in, and that slow build-up of where she scrunches up her face and then starts to scream like, yeah,
I can't do it.
I think she does a great job.
Yeah. But I'm not an actress, so of course I can't do it.
Yeah. And we're going to wrap up the character section with Henry Bowers, played by Jared Blankhart as a kid, and then Michael Cole as an adult.
He didn't get a hand job in a junkyard, so 0 out of 10.
He also didn't get to murder his father.
0 out of 10.
Which, to give the new movies a little credit, that's something that I felt like was a good decision they got right.
That was a good addition. I do love the greaser look.
If somebody says movie bully to me, this is what I picture.
I picture it in 1950s greaser.
Yeah. And like, to me as a kid, he was like the ultimate TV movie bully. That's the first thing that always came to my mind. As reading it or watching it as an adult, having read the book a few times, there's a lot they left out. Mm-hmm. But again, a lot of that was just stuff that was never going to be included in this kind of adaptation.
I want you to remember every rock you threw.
He says that.
Yeah.
He does.
I love that part.
Do you want me to put it in my mouth, Henry? I don't go for that queer shit.
I really like the sewer scene where Belch is dragged into the
pipe.
Into the pipe.
Yeah, I'm sad that we didn't get to see Frankenstein's monster take their heads off, but that scene is really great.
Yeah, that's another scene that I really remember when I think of this movie, is the boy's body just being bent and dragged into a pipe.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, it's a fake pair of legs, and he's just laying straight over the fake pair of legs, but it looks so good.
Yeah, no, I love it.
And it holds up 30 years later.
I buy it.
32 years later.
And how the kid actor just went with that, I thought that was really good.
Yeah, the kid who played Belch and Victor, they don't do a lot, but I like what they do.
I don't know if you'd I've heard people call it like a fourth wall break, whenever the kids go into the sewers and Henry Bowers goes, and I'll tell you what, and he looks right at the camera and goes, they ain't coming back out.
I mean, I guess so, but
I still like it.
He's Deadpool. Henry Bowers is Deadpool.
I like seeing Belch as a zombie again. It
was good.
Just chatting with Henry, and I love Henry's reaction in this because he's all like, "What are you doing under the bed?" It's very different.
So, adult Henry, I go back and forth between thinking it's bad or thinking that no, they really wanted to just make him look pathetic, and they really achieve that.
He's adult. I don't know if you'd call this a criticism. Maybe this is more of an observation. Adult Henry in this reminds me a lot more of an actual mental health patient, as opposed to somebody whose mind was broken by a Lovecraftian horror.
Yeah.
which is what you get in the book.
Granted, he probably should have been a mental health patient just from the trauma of growing up with his dad.
Yeah.
Aside from having his mind broken. But
I hate to reinforce negative stereotypes, but I worked in mental health for 5 years, and Henry and this, I'm like, yeah, no, I've treated like 30, 40 people like that at this point. What are you doing under the bed?
I do think that the showdown with Henry at the hotel is kind of a letdown compared to what happens in the book.
Yeah, because there's especially a lot of build-up in the book.
Yeah, and then there's the scene between him and Mike is great, and then the scene with him and Eddie is great.
And him and Belch.
Yeah.
It's a different kind of great than what we get in this.
And it's just kind of super simplified, which, I mean, I guess considering the time restraints they had and everything.
You have 3 hours to do Stephen King's It. Good luck.
Yeah, which is why we just need that 8-hour version.
At this point, I'd probably pick Guillermo del Toro.
Yeah, that would be great too.
Oh, he's who I'd pick for a more like Hollywood director. If I got to choose my actual person, it would be Shimizu. Is it Takashi Shimizu? He did the Grudge movies. And mostly just because he can take like $0 and make the Grudge.
Yeah. Mike Flanagan would probably be a good choice.
Mike Flanagan would be a great choice. Oh my god. You still need to watch Midnight Mass.
Yeah, I do. God, even like, give me something like, I know this is so weird, but like Spielberg, where it's kind of like, you know, because he did E.T., which kind of is like this group of kids on bikes and blah, blah, blah. But he also did Poltergeist, which I think you could kind of marry the two to, granted, he doesn't really make movies like that anymore.
I'll kill you all! I'll drive you crazy, and I'll kill you all! I'm every nightmare you ever had. I am your worst dream come true. I'm everything you ever were afraid of.
Alright, so let's wrap up characters. Let's head on to scary shit. So we've already kind of talked a little bit about this, where we both said, you know, this kind of scared the shit of us out as kids. Can't really say it's super scary anymore, but again, that's me having seen it more than 10 times over the course of my life. I'm not sure there is a movie that I've seen that many times that I still find to be like legitimately scary.
I think the parts that hold up in this miniseries hold up really well. I think that they're I'm trying to think of the word here. Timeless feels too strong of a word, but for lack of a better word, I'm going to use timeless. They're scenes that are going to be good no matter when I watch them.
I think that you could consider Tim Curry's performance timeless.
His performance is timeless. The scene with Georgie. And like I said, would I like sort of a little bit more of a visceral scene?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I still think that scene's very iconic. Even the way the boat floats to the door and there's just the skulls piled in front of the little door. I think that's really good. The kids' performances hold up.
What scene scared you most as a kid?
Probably the Georgie scene.
Same.
I know this sounds dumb, but it's like right around the time when I was realizing, oh shit, I'm mortal.
Yeah.
Like that and Pet Sematary gave me nightmares for years.
Oh god, Pet Sematary fucked me up so bad.
Pet Sematary messed me up more because when I watched it, that's how Gage, how old he was in the movie is how old Anthony was at the time when I watched it.
Your brother, yeah.
Yeah, my youngest brother. So that's what I pictured.
As a kid, and still, like, I liked it more. I'm more into that story, but Pet Sematary definitely scared me more.
And now when I try to read Cujo, I picture Asher.
Yeah.
So.
Oh my goodness. Maybe we'll do Cujo next year and get you through. Oh, well, he's doing the sequel.
Yeah, so we have to. Now I have to commit.
Yeah. We'll get you through it. I'll hold your hand.
The Rattlesnakes just sounds like such a cool title, and I'm hoping it's really just about rattlesnakes.
I wonder if there's, like, any kind of date for that yet. Well, let's see.
You know what I mean? Like, I want a Stephen King story where he just writes about snakes. I want him to redo the script to Anaconda. He'll hire that dude that we watch on YouTube for the movie.
No real, like, date or anything.
As soon as we find out,
Yeah.
we'll schedule it around that, I guess.
Yeah, it'll be like Firestarter where we just jam it in.
I actually managed to read a book in a week instead of a month.
Yeah.
I'm only halfway through Taipan.
Well, Taipan is really long. It's not nearly as long as Shogun,
Yeah.
but it's still a pretty long book.
I when I go on Audible, when I'm choosing a book, I go, how many hours is it? And Taipan was 33. I'm like, well, it's not 44.
Yeah. No.
So,
It is shorter than Shogun.
it is shorter than it. Where were we? I went on a tangent there.
We're
It's like scary shit?
yeah.
Oh, okay. How do you feel about the spider?
Okay, so a little bit on the spider.
That's another thing that gets criticized a lot, so I want to get your feedback.
Jar Jar Binks. I'm a defender of Phantom Menace. I'm not a defender of Jar Jar Binks, but what does kind of get my goat is where the one thing that people continually bring up about why Phantom Menace was bad was because they didn't like Jar Jar Binks and he was too over the top. And I'm like, yeah.
What else?
What else? And that's the first thing that people go to when they're criticizing it is the spider. And I'm like, I get it. It wasn't great. What else? And it's just like, it drives me nuts when you just have this one criticism and you can't go any further than that and have a legitimate conversation, any kind of real discourse. It's like, oh man, I hated Phantom Menace. Jar Jar was so bad. It's like,
as a kid, I didn't find the spider scary, but it's just like, oh, it's a giant spider. Okay,
Yeah.
I can get down with that. It had been spoiled for me that was the true form. I knew a giant spider was coming. I was like, oh, okay, so that's what it looks like. Looking at it as an adult, I'm really big into practical effects, so I start to notice the little things that aren't quite right. I don't think it's as bad as a lot of people say it is. It's definitely not as bad as some stuff to come.
I don't think it's great. I don't think it's terrible.
I really liked its deadlights at first,
Uh-huh.
when it gets up and Bill goes there, and it's almost like the ritual of Chewed is
Yeah.
starting.
He steps up to it like he's going to do the ritual.
And I almost feel like they halfway wanted to do that and then realized, oh, we can't really explain all this cosmological shit.
Well, again, so
they stopped.
the spider was part of those rewrites that I was talking about, because the original version was Tom was going to be the main antagonist in the second half.
Oh my god.
And so when Tommy Lee Wallace was rewriting it, he was like, okay, I'm just going to make it as close to the book as I can, minus all the metaphysical shit.
And if you're gonna cut something out,
yeah,
I really want to see the metaphysical stuff represented at some point in an adaptation. But for back then,
for the model of the spider himself, in the oral history, he says he was shown a miniature, and he approved the miniature, and then he let the special effects team just do it, and then he didn't see it again until it was the day of shooting, and he says, that was my mistake. I should have had more oversight over the special effects team, because he doesn't like it. He thinks it's the worst part of it. And he fully admits that he was at fault and he should have had a bigger hand in that. But actually, for me, it's not so much that the spider... Because I think the spider looks okay.
yeah, it's okay.
My actual criticism of the conclusion is the direction and the shot. So on paper, I kind of like everything that happens, and specifically, I like that Ben and Beverly are included in the final fight with the spider instead of being left behind.
Shoots a sling.
Yeah.
Then they all rip the heart out.
But I think that scene was shot awkwardly, where it just looks like 4 grown people beating up on a punching bag.
On a puppet, yeah.
Yeah, and it... But I think...
But it didn't have a lot of animatronics to it.
I think that scene could have been shot better and it wouldn't have looked as bad.
Again, I've never directed anything. I can only go by things that I've seen and things that I like. I would have veiled it more in shadows.
Yes, and again, this is me being an armchair director. I can't specifically tell you how to do it better. I just know it could have done better. And in the oral history, Tommy Lee Wallace specifically says the main thing that he would have done differently is he would have showed less of the spider. That's the one thing he would have changed if he could go back.
Yeah. And honestly, I think that he deserves a lot of props for all the constraints he had dealing with a writer who just goes, no, I'm not doing that.
Yeah, no, and...
that sounds like a real diva move.
It was.
I'm sorry that your melodrama about the abusive husband isn't as interesting of a horror concept as the cosmological world eater.
And then I also read an interview with Lawrence T. Kasdan, the writer, who said, no, I won't rewrite it. And he gave some reasons, which makes sense. One being, like, he was a part of the original team with George A. Romero when it was supposed to be 8 hours, and he lost a lot of enthusiasm for the project when they cut it down.
I mean, I guess that makes sense, but it's still...
It's still your job. Yeah.
It's still your job, and you're leaving someone else hanging with it all.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't have been thrilled about doing it. You know me, I want to be a writer. If somebody's adapting something, hypothetically, that I wrote, and they go, we need you to come out here and help with it, I might be annoyed, but I'm probably just going to go, okay, I'm going to help make the best thing possible.
Yeah.
Because his name's still attached to it.
And they could have also, he was in Hollywood. He didn't necessarily have to fly to Canada. They could have faxed each other back and forth drafts.
It's not like it was horse and buggies.
Yeah, and he could have at least given him like some input. He's like, okay, well, if you don't like that direction, you write it, but here's a direction you could go instead.
Like spitball an idea or two, something.
Yeah, I read interviews with both of them, and they both give the same story. It's just like, no, I'm not going to be involved. Good luck. Which is kind of shitty. But
also, we weren't there, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know if you'd call this a criticism of our podcast. It's more of an observation to me. You and I always try to be fair to these people because we are not there.
So right now I'm reading Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. And have you read it?
No, I've read Pride and Prejudice like 3 times, but not the spoof.
So it's at the point where Elizabeth meets the guy who gives her all the dirt on Mr. Darcy. And she is talking to her sister about how she's just like, yeah, Mr. Darcy's such a dick. This guy I just met told me all these things, and Darcy's terrible. And her sister is defending Mr. Darcy and coming up with all these explanations. Well, maybe this or maybe that. And Elizabeth just jumps all over her sister. Was like, are you ever going to dislike anybody? Are you ever going to criticize anybody? You're always making excuses for everybody. And I'm like, yeah, but I mean, that's just kind of a Steve Rogers way to live.
I just like to try to examine things from every possible angle.
I try to give people the benefit of the doubt as much as possible.
Yeah.
Kiss me, fat boy.
Kiss me, fat boy. Do you think the story loses anything by leaving out most of the sex parts?
I think it loses something, but it's hard for me to put my finger on exactly what.
Yeah, it definitely loses something, but is whatever it loses really necessary to tell the story that we're trying to tell?
To tell the bare bones story of a child-eating monster, no. To tell a story that's about growing up and what you gain as an adult, what you lose as a child, the bridges you cross in between. I think sex is a big part of a lot of those things. Yeah. Except for the small percentage of people who turn out to be asexual. I do not want to sound uninclusive. But for a lot of people, that's like... I would say probably for the vast majority of people, sexual discovery is a major part of growing up. And Stephen King didn't ignore that. No. He made it super uncomfortable towards the end.
There are things I would have
done differently.
Yeah. But I do think that parts of it are integral to the story.
But what exactly is lost in translation by taking it out?
Not much. In my opinion, anyway.
The only way I can describe it is as I know something's missing. It's like that feeling when I know something's missing, but I don't know what, and I want it there, but I don't know why.
Yeah.
It's like when I go through short periods of being single. Mm-hmm. Probably because I'm not having sex. I don't know. It's kind of a lonely feeling. It's very sanitized. It's like when I watch Full House, it doesn't feel like... When you take sex out of people, it stops feeling real to me. And maybe that's just because I'm a hypersexual person. Spoilers. That's how it always comes across.
Yeah.
But then you have those weird things like all the hand touching and the kissing, and I'm like, man, it's like they want to do it, but they just stop just short.
Yeah. Ugh.
The power of Christ compels you! The power of Christ compels you!
So for Power of Christ Compels You, I had written down the idea of belief and how it's kind of more literal in the book, and how they explicitly talk about how if they believe that silver slugs will kill him, then it will. We kind of talked about that.
Yeah, they explicitly spell it out here.
Yeah, so I don't think there's a lot to add. Okay, so some Easter eggs. Georgie's middle name is Elmer.
Like the Fudd?
Like Elmer Fudd. Doesn't stutter, but he has a lisp, but is friends with Looney Tunes star Porky Pig, who does stutter, like Georgie's brother Bill. And they even make a joke in the miniseries.
They made a joke about that.
Yeah.
One of the kids got the character wrong.
Yeah, and
Eddie got all weeabooey about it.
Yep.
Cartoonabooey?
Cartoony booey. So Frank C. Turner, who plays Al Marsh, is also in Needful Things, which Carrie really wants us to read, which we will do at some point.
It's on the short list for our season 2.
So when they're flipping through the photo album, there's one old drawing of Pennywise standing outside a little house that's been set on fire. You think that's supposed to be the black spot?
I assume so, or at least like an allusion to it. It's like when Henry said that his family's been giving me trouble. There's little allusions to some of the larger stuff in the book that I feel like the director probably really wanted to do. That's the way it came across to me, but he couldn't.
Pennywise says in the sewer, "I am eternal, child. I am the eater of worlds," which kind of alludes that all the metaphysical stuff is real, but they're just not going into it.
They just can't explicitly show things like the cosmological form or the turtle. He uses that line in the book, doesn't he? I'm the eater of worlds.
Yeah.
I like the implication of that this isn't the first time he's done this.
Yeah.
So I like to picture like some alien planet had a Pennywise.
I mean, maybe Pennywise is Deadpool, and he went from the book It to the miniseries It.
Or just different timelines. That'd be cool.
Yeah. I could see that. Well, I mean, that's the thing about, we won't get into that. When we finally do Dark Tower, we'll get into that.
Yeah, I hear that has like a lot of like multiversal stuff.
It is. It's kind of what pulls all of Stephen King's story together into a multiverse.
Okay.
So what you just said with different timelines of Derry, it fits into the Dark Tower lore, but we'll save that because I think we'll do that eventually.
I have kind of a weeby comparison to Pennywise, and that's Lavos from the Chrono Trigger games. It's an alien that crashes on the planet, destroys the planet, and then there's like a bunch of little mini Lavoses that you can fight later, implying that it's going to go to all these other worlds.
What if he's just like a messenger, he's like the scout for Frieza? Like Frieza sends Pennywise to the planet to loosen
I'm gonna be honest. I'd rather deal with Frieza than I would Pennywise.
Same. Oh yeah, for sure. Okay, more references. So Bill Denbrow's books. Some of them are references to Stephen King's books. Like one of them is The Glowing, aka The Shining.
There was a poster for a movie called The Growling in the background.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the first thing I noticed.
One of his books is called Gargoyle's Dance, which is kind of a combination of his two nonfiction books, Dance Macabre, which is an examination of meta-horror, and Nightmares in the Sky, which is a nonfiction coffee table book he wrote about gargoyles.
Huh.
Direct quote from the film, "Koontz is the worst. I hate him." Without comment.
I like Koontz, but I can't say I like him as much as King.
Yeah, same. And then here's a quote from Dennis Christopher, who played Eddie. I got this from the oral history of it. My character's nickname was Eddie Spaghetti. My brother's name is Eddie, and we called him Eddie Spaghetti growing up. So I just thought that was cool.
That's cute.
Okay, so moving on to Kings and Koontz.
Oh my God, are you Stephen King? No, I'm Dean Koontz. Oh,